In 1959, a couple of bored American adolescents in a small American city, Whittier, California, birthplace of Richard Nixon, were debating whether Whittier was the most boring city in America. The high schoolers' names were Carrie Thornley, Thornley, and Greg Hill. They had first gone to talk at Carrie's house, but around 10 p.m., Carrie's mom came down to tell them to be quiet because people were trying to sleep. So they took their discussion over to Greg's house, where 10 minutes into the subject, with asides to Jean-Paul Sartre's Nausea, which they had both just read, Greg's mom came down the stairs to tell them to take their nonsense somewhere else. People were trying to sleep. So they went out on the street and walked on without pausing to talk when a cop car pulled alongside. The officer walked out and said to the boys, "What's so important you have to disturb the peace around here?" Carrie said something to the effect that if Whittier got any quieter, it might have to call itself a graveyard instead of a city. Well, that did it. Carrie and Greg tried to think of one place in America where they could carry on their discussion. So they decided to go to New Orleans, to the Bourbon House, an all-night bar in the French Quarter where Carrie could recite his poetry out loud and argue politics at the top of his voice. That is about the same reason why I, Andrei Codrescu, a refugee from the eerily silent and unbearably boring communist country of Romania, ended up drinking at the same bar in New Orleans and keeping up an all-night racket reading my poetry and arguing politics. Same bar, same city, but not the same time. Before getting to the Bourbon House, Carrie joined the Marines and was stationed in Japan at a secret radar station. The year was 1960, and Carrie was working on a novel about the men in his platoon called Idle Warriors, about the drinking and whoring of his fellow Marines. The main character was a serious and slight man who read Karl Marx and called himself a communist and was the butt of jokes by his fellow soldiers. Carrie protected the fellow and debated him with some respect. The novel languished until his character, whose real name was Lee Harvey Oswald, defected to the Soviet Union. Carrie had the ending to his novel. When he got out of the service, he headed for New Orleans. It was 1961. In the French Quarter, he read from his book and argued politics all night in the Bourbon House. In 1965, not long before the events we will consider in this podcast, I fled the communist utopia of Karl Marx and went to New Orleans, where I read my poetry and argued about politics with maybe the same barflies Carrie had. Between 1960 and 1965, America got a lot less boring. The main character of Idle Warriors assassinated the President of the United States. A spoof Bible Carrie co-authored with Greg Hill in high school in the most boring city in the world under the name Omar Khayyam Ravenhurst, Principia Discordia, became the manifesto of a generation. Karl Marx and communism started to tumble into the dust of history. Only New Orleans stayed more or less the same.